Hello students, so today we are going to start a very interesting poem, The Squirrel, from your book Honeycomb. Now you may have seen a squirrel roaming here and there, eating nuts here and there, right? So how does a squirrel looks like? The poet Mildred Bowers Armstrong describes the squirrel in a different way, okay? So let's start. He wore a question mark for tail. Now how does a question mark looks like? Right, like this, right? And it is twisted. So the tail of the squirrel is little twisted. So the poet is describing that the tail of the squirrel looks like a question mark that is in a twisted way. An overcoat of grey. Now here the overcoat of grey signifies that the fur of the squirrel, like how the brown furs of the squirrel looks like, that is the overcoat of grey. He sat up straight to eat a nut. So whenever a squirrel has to eat a nut, he actually sit like a straight manner, like a straight creature and eat a nut. He liked to tease and play, and the most important hobby, the passion of the squirrel is to eat a nut. With that, apart from it, the squirrel actually teases, the squirrel actually roams here and there and plays here and there on the trees, etc. And if we ran around his tree, he went the other way. You cannot catch a squirrel in a very easy manner. You need to actually go here and there to catch the squirrel, right? So if you want to catch the squirrel, if you want to run around the squirrel, if you want to play the squirrel actually turns it in the other way. So this is a short poem about the squirrel, at how a squirrel looks like, what the tail of the squirrel looks like, how the fur, how the body of the squirrel looks like, also what is the hobby of the squirrel, and how can we catch a squirrel, which is actually not possible because squirrel cannot be, you cannot catch it, right? Now let's see the summary of the poem. This short and beautiful poem talks about a squirrel, one of the most loving creatures found on earth. Now this is a very beautiful poem about a squirrel and a very small creature, a very cute, very loving creature found on the earth is squirrel, that is described by the poet. The poet describes a squirrel sitting on a tree and eating a nut, and the most important hobby of the poet is that the squirrel sits on the tree and eats a nut. He sat straight and his tail appeared like a question mark in a very twisted form. And the writer found it quite amusing, and the writer found it quite interesting that how the tail of the squirrel is quite twisted. How does it looks like a question mark? He is described as wearing a grey overcoat, which means pointing towards the grey furry skin of the squirrel. So the grey overcoat does not mean that a squirrel is actually wearing a grey overcoat. It simply means that the fur of the skin of the squirrel is actually grey in color and it is very soft like a overcoat. Interestingly, the squirrel liked to tease and play, and the passion of the squirrel is to play, is to tease everyone. The writer and perhaps his friend ran after him only to scare him away and making him take the other way. So even the human beings like to play with the squirrel, and what does they do? They actually ran behind them. They actually ran behind the squirrel so that the squirrel gets scared and ran the other way, and in that way even human beings enjoy with the squirrel. So this is the story about the squirrel. All you need to do in this lesson is you need to know the whole summary of the lesson, of the poem, and the name of the writer. Alright, so I hope you like this poem. Thank you so much.